Crash Bandicoot is a 2.5D platformer developed by Naughty Dog and published by Sony Computer Entertainment in 1996. Directed by half of the creative force behind Way of the Warrior, Jason Rubin, and produced by David Siller, the producer of Era the Acrobat 2, Crash Bandicoot soon became known as one of the icons of the PlayStation. The game stars the titular Bandicoot as he escapes the clutches of his creator, Dr. Neo Cortex. Determined to find his way back and rescue his girlfriend Tawna, Crash teams up with the spirit of a witch doctor and sets out to ruin his creator's plans across 3 islands just off the coast of Australia. When you look at all the franchises that bled out trying to break through the polygon ceiling in the 90s, the approach Naughty Dog took to solve this oblique problem was very smart, but also a bit boring. Kicking the can of fully explorable 3D spaces down the road for a few years, Crash is an immaculately crafted linear experience that constantly flirts with the Z-axis while still sticking to the ideals of a 2D platformer. This is in service of the unreal graphical throughput the team achieved by basically inventing the concept of real-time CD data streaming. I might be wrong on them being the very first, but it's no less of an achievement of graphical dark sorcery. They really nailed the idea of a playable cartoon using their Vertex animation solution, but the shadow of Super Mario 64 still loomed large. Though really, so much of Donkey Kong Country can be found here that I find that a more apt comparison point. Thematically speaking, there's also a bit of Sonic in there, which may be a given since it's Sonic's ass game and all. I see Crash Bandicoot as the result of some very capable people taking a look at the platformer landscape circa 1995, accurately identifying what worked, and then setting out to make a mascot platformer of their own worth remembering. It really is the anti-Bubsy whose 3D incarnation showed up drunk to the reception 2 months later. Beyond a good game, what Naughty Dog also achieved with this title was establishing part of the studio's creative identity. Ignoring the racing games and their 5-year stint with more open-ended platformers, what really comes to mind when discussing modern Naughty Dog as a studio is their hyperlinear narrative games with more graphics than God. Crash also fits that mold, but doesn't have much of a story, which hampers my point. That's a shame, as I think there could be some good stuff here had they only filled in the holes. Being a mascot platformer of the 90s using the Mario school of narrative, nobody would bat an eye at you for completely ignoring the plot of Crash Bandicoot. But I want to talk about it anyway, starting with the intro.
But Dr. Cortex, we have not determined the cause of past failures.
Moron! This Bandicoot will be my general, and he will lead my Cortex commandos to world domination. This time I shall reign triumphant! We are closer than ever before! Quickly! Into the vortex!
But Dr. Cortex, the vortex is not ready. We have no idea what it could do.
Failure again! Capture him!
Uh-oh!
Prepare the female bandit.
That's it for our one proper cutscene, a very Spartan introduction which could have done with some more context. But we're grading on a mid-90s platformer curve here, and it almost gets you invested. The cultured among you have no doubt noticed the allusion to Frankenstein when Crash gets hoisted up into the Cortex vortex, which is an apt thing to take inspiration from. But the exact situation is quite different, though you have to peruse the manual to paint the whole picture. Cortex is a hateful man shunned by the scientific community, and by using the evolver ray invented by his henchman Embryo combined with the Cortex vortex, he intends to mutate and then enslave an army of animals so he can take over the world. Unlike Book Frankenstein, who became terrified of his creation and fled from his responsibility as creator, Cortex had complete malicious intent, mutating a hapless mammal and then intending to brainwash it into becoming a general in his army. Now would be the time to take a step back and realize that Cortex is an insane abusive monster, very much belittled by his later comedic appearances. Not that this game actually does anything with him, or any of the other characters for that matter. Poor Tawna was doomed to begin with, and as she is now can be replaced with a battery-driven standee, but Crash doesn't do much better. Going by the game itself, it's difficult to tell if Crash is even aware of where he's going or just horrified to be directed by the player. The Japanese version puts a band-aid on this by having the witch doctor spirit Aku Aku speak in text to establish that Cortex has done terrible things to the islands and that Tawna needs to be rescued. That reframes Crash as a hero out of his depths who is no less determined to find his love, which is probably what they were going for in the Western version too, given some bits in the manual. It also gives a sneak peek at Aku Aku's role as good magic dad of Crash in later games, in contrast with Cortex as evil science dad. Something the series as a whole probably could have done something with, I'm sure. But here it does at least anchor Crash, a creature of two worlds, on the side of nature. Playing through the game, it's unclear how much of your early opposition is actually Cortex's doing and how much is just Australia. There are a fair few enemies that are normal wild animals, and the natives are probably less than keen on having one of Cortex's creatures crash on through. But starting with Ripperoo, we clearly see the damage Cortex has done, as the kangaroo just went insane in the evolve array and spends his time being an active danger to everything around him. Koala Kong strikes me as the ideal result of the process, ironic though it may be for a koala. Pinstripe just loves this shit though, and somehow gets paid for reasons that escape me. Somebody please explain to me the logistics of employing your mutant slaves after going through the trouble of brainwashing them. I get the feeling Cortex has a screw and a checkbook loose. But for as much as goes unspoken, the game does a good job of flaunting Cortex's negative influence once you reach Island 3, aptly named after the man. I think starting the island off with the heavy machinery level was a bit of a miss, as the second level, Cortex Power, has you begin on familiar soil before you pass the threshold and witness Cortex's titular power in effect. Once you make it to the generator room level, you're hit with this oppressive miasma of smoke and strange machinery, which when combined with the nonsensical layout makes you question what kind of twisted mind engineered all this and to what end. To really drive the point home, the toxic waste level shows that Cortex literally weaponizes his corruptive influence, using a selection of Pinstripe's mutated underlings to crush you to death with toxic waste. If you ever wanted to point to a single level that embodies the theme of unbridled creation born of hatred for the world leading to its destruction, this is the one. For the final stretch, the game's atmosphere has been building up to a grand encounter with something evil for multiple levels, which does of course happen, but it lacks impact. The boss fight against Embryo is really good, as it shows his desperate attempt at using his knowledge of bioengineering to kill you. But he's just a stopgap on the way to Cortex, who suffers from the lack of cutscenes. While I'm glad they didn't go for the traditional cartoon cutscenes, which would have clashed with the partially serious tone of the final game, having no more proper cutscenes at all is really felt as you load up the final boss.
Darn you, Crash Bandicoot!
All of a sudden, you're on a blimp, with Cortex coming after you with a single line of dialogue as his castle burns down in the background. One can assume that Crash set the place on fire somehow, but this confrontation between creature and creator doesn't feel finished. The whole idea of this scenario is for Cortex to get an ironic dose of karma from the idiotic and love-struck failson he intended to throw away, but it just doesn't hit as well without proper setup. A quick scene where Cortex monologues as Crash completely ignores him and accidentally blows something up would have worked wonders here. Since we don't get anything to that effect in gameplay or in cutscenes, it just seems like Crash got bamfed into the fight after warping out of the Great Hall. Not unlike how Tawna suddenly appears on the blimp during the ending to play the part of Trophy Wife. And to symbolize the power of love triumphing over hateful madmen brainwashing the innocent, I suppose. Always a welcome theme. But that was it. Not much more to talk about. Which is kind of the problem. I know I'm being silly expecting more from a platformer like this, but they almost had something going here before the franchise went full cartoon. It's fun to think about what the series would be like if Crash became some sort of eco-warrior fighting the good fight, but storytelling plays second wampa to platforming in these games, and we have to respect that. Taking inspiration from a certain Tasmanian devil, Crash Bandicoot's one claim to fame is his incredible ability to spin so fast he sends things flying at high velocity. That can prove to be both a help and a hindrance, but more often than not it just looks and sounds funny. Beyond that, all Crash can really do is jump around, making this a two-button game. As such, the entire experience hinges on how it feels to do those two things and the amount of ideas the levels can throw at you to keep things fresh. The sound effects whenever you bounce on something or break a bunch of crates are excellent, but nothing lifts your mood like nabbing a bunch of Wumpa fruit and extra lives. Play well enough and you can chain it all together in a very satisfying manner. But unless you grab enough hit point masks for a bout of invincibility, progressing through the levels will be a slow and methodical experience, as Crash is rather heavy for the genre. The levels are often designed to slow you down as well, so sometimes even being invincible will feel pointless. Given that speed is Sonic's thing and that the game can only load level chunks so fast, this was probably the right decision. But coming to grips with the momentum and especially how to stop on a dime takes a bit of effort, which is why this first game is a bit infamous. Having completed the game again, I'd say there's nothing inherently wrong with the controls, but they still don't feel as good as they could, as proven by the sequels. Thankfully, the levels themselves pick up the slack. Level design in Crash Bandicoot is downright classical. It starts simple and ends just as it gets frustrating with a wide variety of platforming challenges in between. Almost all level types get used twice, first to introduce new challenges and then to make sure you have really mastered them. They generally fall into three categories: straightforward 3D levels, 2D levels moving you right, up and left, as well as certain levels mixing both approaches by alternating if the camera locks the Z-axis or not. What helps give the game flavor is that even in the 2D levels you can still move freely back and forth, which can lead you to an early grave if there aren't any invisible walls present. But in some levels like Native Fortress, this is also used to hide secrets. It feels like a game fully aware of its three dimensions, but not yet ready to commit to the third. Another interesting piece of transitionary 90s non-commitment is the save system, which supports both passwords and the memory card. The standard way of saving is by collecting 3 Tawna tokens in a level to get transported to a bonus round where you get a few lives and an odd encounter with Tawna. Those extra lives are almost moot, as upon loading a save they will all be gone. I assume this is done to keep password complexity down, but it's thankfully easy enough to work up a decent stock again. Especially if you actually manage to complete a rare embryo bonus round, which can prove more difficult than most levels. Same for the even rarer Cortex bonus rounds, which give you keys for 2 bonus levels. What sucks about this saving system is that you aren't provided a normal bonus round on every level and none after a boss, so there are a couple of spots where you have to press on to save or accept redoing a level. Bosses are simple enough and levels are short enough for it to barely matter, but it's still a glaring flaw. Thankfully, every collectible triggers an opportunity to save, so you won't lose any hard-earned progress. There are also some gimmick levels to break up the adventure, namely the iconic boulder chase levels and the boar levels. Both of these send you going at full sprint forwards or backwards with little concern for precision maneuvers as long as you stay alive. Though I found box collecting on the board to be troubling at times, it's as if the board moves faster than the collision calculations can run, which, while kinda rad if true, does make it frustrating if you're gunning for 100%. A normal playthrough of Crash Bandicoot is about 2 to 4 hours long depending on skill, but achieving 100% completion can add a fair bit to that, especially without perfect routing. Each non-boss level contains a gem which can only be collected by clearing the level without dying and while breaking all the boxes in it. This raises the skill requirement in levels a fair bit and makes the extra life system near pointless. It's the difference between victory and mastery, as there is now a very harsh limit to mistakes for each level. Even the simpler levels can turn tense, and the lengthier ones are downright brutal to get perfect. But platforming skill isn't all that gets tested, as about a fifth of the levels hide boxes in sneaky places that demand a curious mind. Worse yet, a lot of levels are straight up impossible to fully complete the first time through, since they contain special gem platforms that remain incorporeal until the correct colored gem has been collected. These colored gems are few in number and have no special requirements save for the purple one requiring the yellow. The trouble is figuring out where to actually use them, as the game doesn't directly tell you on the map what levels can be fully completed. Your one hint is the color of the gem platform you want to use, but it can be difficult to tell what gem is required since they fade away when you get close. Not to mention that the orange and yellow gems have very similar looking platforms, and unless you write it down, you'll probably forget anyway. At its worst, the colored gem system will have you run around in circles wasting time on levels you still can't fully complete. An experience I probably haven't had since I think I partially looked up the locations when I 100%ed the game the first time. Which still leaves you with the platforming challenge for the gem, mind you, with marathon levels like Sunset Vista openly mocking such worldly wants. Looking past the backtracking, there are of course some positive things that this system allows for as well. I'm kinda neutral on the little nooks that give you extra lives, but I'm sure someone out there got use out of backtracking to stock up for later levels. What's exciting are the ways a couple of early levels get properly extended by their gem paths, showing that they were in fact on par with the second level of the set all along. That's not very common, but the lesser additions are no less worthwhile. What these gem paths show you is that just off screen from the normal path, there were always some neat things you hadn't even considered before. Stuff like a bunch of boxes up in the clouds or a bio-illuminated cave claimed by Cortex. These side areas are small, but I think they add a very specific quality to the game as they feed into the immersive illusion a game is meant to create. Unlike modern titles, which try their damnedest to replicate real spaces, here on the PlayStation that just wasn't in the cards. But by showing that the world is bigger than it first seemed, it tricks you into imagining what else could be out there. A lot of games have these unseen sights, either as part of 100% completion or in the form of obscure Easter eggs. Establishing a world and asking people to explore it to its very limits are one of the great strengths of the medium. And in the case of Crash Bandicoot, this also gives you an excuse to get the most out of the game's sights and sounds. I've already touched on the graphics and soundscape a little bit, but a discussion of Crash Bandicoot is not complete without fully mentioning what an audiovisual treat this game is. Crash himself is very expressive, but just look at all the detail put into this first level. There is super dense vegetation, loads of weird ruins, and a goddamn butterfly that sits down to rest if you wait long enough.
What have I got?
The main theme used here also sets expectations going forward, as the soundtrack features a lot of drums and xylophones used in creative ways. I think my favorite level theme are the river levels. I always associate Naughty Dog with godly water effects, and the rendering here does so much with so little. Once you venture deeper, you can find those very same instruments used in a scarier fashion accompanied by some strings to great effect, alongside these harsh and simplistic darkness effects of the era that I adore. Machine levels during the final third go for a very artificial set of environments and sounds that make for great contrast with the more natural part of the game beforehand.
What have I got?
There's also an undercurrent of bass lines in a few tracks, none of which hit harder than the one in Cortex's theme. That bassline is so good it gives me life, but that holds true for a lot of this game in general as well. Being a staunch Crash 2 commando, I've only ever come to appreciate this first game after the fact. But now I do, and understand what a groundbreaking release it is. The vision for the gameplay and presentation was so clearly realized that I can look past the plot being so undercooked. It's to the point where I see this game as the moment when the PlayStation and its impact on the industry truly began. That's obviously reductive and untrue, but being able to single out such a clear milestone to rally behind tickles my brain. Looking out into the future, it's just interesting to think about both Naughty Dog and the PlayStation finding such a firm foothold with this game to try and leap onto Mario's throne with. Where they truly landed is up to each of us to answer, but it sure made for a good spectacle. But if you happen to find yourself simply unable to enjoy what Crash Bandicoot has to offer, may I suggest my 100% Let's Play of the game, as linked below? It's a tightly edited showcase of the game that goes so far as to show what horrors the cut, stormy ascent level could have unleashed upon the world. What fresh hell is this? Thankfully, the retail version is a lot more humane, but it's not without its teeth either, which tells me I should ask everyone who had this game as a kid for some good stories. I was spared a lot of strife starting with the sequel and would love to compare notes, so tell me in the comments. Thank you for watching, and please make sure you're subscribed in time for the next episode, whatever it might be.